There are some big, even massive changes coming to ISAs in the next couple of weeks. And we're not talking about the Brit ISA. This is the previous announcements from the autumn statement in November 2023. Promises of using multiple ISAs, fractional shares, the digitalisation of ISAs. But that announcement was months ago. And since then, considering this will be one of the biggest changes to the functionalities of ISAs in years, to me it seems to have gone a little bit quiet. No major updates or press releases on the practicalities of these reforms. Is the finance industry, geared up for this? Are they even ready to implement these changes? I wanted answers to that, so I gave HMRC a call. And well, it didn't go well.
I don't agree with that, so unfortunately your call is now entered, because any question like that should be going through the press office.
So my next step from there was to email the press office, who replied to my questions, and on the same day, they also released this. So-called Tax-Free Savings Newsletter number 11. This newsletter is aimed at ISA providers themselves, so gives us a better idea of how this will work from their side. Let's go through the latest information so that we're fully clued up on the changes ahead of the new financial year. Let's just start with a biggie, the ability to pay into more than one ISA of each type each financial year. So currently the system is pretty restrictive in that if I pay into a cash or a stocks and shares ISA with one provider, let's say Trading 212 for example, then I can't use another one until the following year. I think this limits consumer choice, and I see these reforms as a great way to improve competition in the UK. I know a lot of people watching this are kind of like Vanguard diehards due to the brand reputation and the security that offers. And because they can only pay into one, they just stick with that brand because they trust them. Maybe now this will open up the market a bit, as you can go, well, I can still, put most of my money with Vanguard, but I can just try out a new platform with £100 or whatever just to see if I like it. Really, I had two questions I wanted answering with this. How will it work and how will they police it? So first of all, the newsletter states that the changes are not mandatory and that managers can choose to limit subscriptions to only one ISA held with them in any tax year. So that appears to be platform specific, as in Vanguard might say to you, we won't let you have more than one separate stocks and shares ISA with us at any one point. But the newsletter also goes on and acknowledges it's not possible for you to know if investors are subscribing or have subscribed with other ISA managers, nor the amount of any such subscriptions. Individual investors remain responsible for managing their overall subscription limits. I'm not saying anyone would do this, but I want to address the point anyway. If we remain responsible for our own ISA allowances, what's stopping people from opening up 3 ISAs and filling them all with 20k? By accident or, on purpose. I asked HMRC directly on this point. HMRC receives annual returns from ISA managers which provide details on each investor and their subscriptions. AKA, they're going to get a big list, and if they wanted to, they'll be able to check the entries to see how many payments you've made. There's actually not much stopping me right now from opening 2 stocks and shares ISAs and throwing 20k into each. I know people who have done this because they said they weren't clear on the rules, but there is a way that they can check this. And the process at this point might be manual, and what you might get away with it for a period of time. I imagine the digitalisation of ISAs, which we'll talk about in a minute, will be part of this monitoring process. But yeah, keep a tab on how much that you're paying into each of your ISA providers. Most of them will tell you how much you've paid in that year, and just don't go a quid over, because really the punishments if you break the rules, even by accident, seem quite harsh. If a breach in the ISA rules is found, the tax year in which the breach occurred must be voided. This means that all subscriptions and any gains in that tax year must be removed. I don't think that means they're taking your money, I just think they pull it out of the ISA wrapper, but just don't go over. We also get further clarity in the newsletter that junior ISAs and LISAs are exempt from these rules, so you can only pay into one of those. But from the 6th of April, you're good to go with multiple ISAs of the same type. I'll make a video covering in detail which ISA providers I think are the best for the new financial year, and I'll drop that nearer to the start of the new financial year. If you don't want to wait till then though, I keep a list of all the platforms that I use in the description of every video below. Now I briefly want to talk about this section, which sets out that if you've not paid into an ISA for a year and you come back to it, your provider can currently make you apply for the ISA again. This is just an admin point really, but I mention it because again, the newsletter states that this is not a mandatory thing, so the provider can basically do what they want here. In fact, this appears on 4 of the promised changes, most notably the promise that we will be allowed to do partial transfers of current ISA years' ISA subscriptions between providers. Again, this sort of rule change would provide more flexibility to consumers, but plenty of platforms offer transfers in some format. It's far from a perfect process at the minute, but it does exist. But putting this sentence here seems to me that nothing really is changing here in any meaningful way. And with a few of these rules, the whole it's up to you if you want to do this thing just seems a way of kind of getting around implementing it properly. Okay, one last point before we look at probably the one thing I find slightly concerning about all of this. Point 1.9 talks about the digitalisation of ISA reporting. So in the autumn statement, the government announced that they would be looking to digitalise ISAs. And again, I think that's more to do with tracking who's paying into what across all these different providers. But what is clear from this is that process has not really started in any meaningful way yet, with them expecting the first meetings to take place in April. Okay. So there's one final thing that is missing from this newsletter that I think is a biggie we need to discuss. There is not a single mention of the treatment of fractional shares. Just to bring you up to speed with this, a fractional share is a fraction or a part of a share. If you buy £10 worth of Alphabet stock or Google, you then own a slice of that, in that case, a fraction. HMRC has a pretty dim view on this sort of ownership. A fraction of a share is not a share and therefore cannot be held in an ISA. My view on this is that this definition is based on a definition of share ownership that is decades old. I would argue it's outdated, but the taxman's view on this is far more important than my own. The issue really is a lot of retail investors buy these fractions of shares, and there's not much clarity on, what constitutes as a fraction. In the Google example again, let's say I buy $10 a month of Alphabet stock for around 14 months. I now have one full share's worth of Alphabet stock at current prices. But do I own 14 bits of different fractions of different shares, or do they go, oh, he's got a full share now, so group all those together and make one whole share out of it? It's not very clear. Also, when I buy into a global ETF, my money is spread across hundreds of businesses, if not thousands of companies. Am I not by definition buying fractions of shares of thousands of businesses every time I cost average into one of those funds? Now, to be fair to HMRC, there are different types of fractional shares. Some of them represent more obscure derivatives contracts, promises to shares, and the problem with that is, what happens if the broker goes under and they've not correctly allocated full shares to the bits of shares that they've said that people own? I can see why the taxman might be a little bit concerned here, but there just needs to be a clear approach here where they go, any fractional share must be backed up and assigned to a real corresponding share. This then has to be held separate to the broker's assets in accordance with the UK's CAS rules, and that fraction of a share must entitle the owner of that fraction any benefit associated with the full share. For example, a fraction of a dividend. Now, voting on shares is a bit more complicated, and I'm really not sure what the approach should be there. But the absence of further clarity on this point in the newsletter is not that reassuring. They should have mentioned it at least, but it's more of an industry-facing newsletter, not something meant to address public concern, so I guess, that's why. But I did ask for clarity on this fractional share point and just wanted to know from HMRC, where are you up to with this? I think it's best I just read exactly what they've said in their email, so I'm sorry this is going to be a bit of a text dump, but I just want it to come straight from the horse's mouth. The government has concluded exploratory work that has moved us to the next phase of drafting amendments to ISA regulations. These amendments will permit qualifying investments, as announced in the autumn statement. The government is working as quickly as possible to bring legislation by the end of summer following a detailed engagement with industry stakeholders and the FCA. We recognise the importance of finding solutions that address the concerns of both investors and ISA managers who are currently holding fractions of shares within their ISAs. We're carefully assessing all options with the aim of arriving at a balanced approach which aligns with the current regulations while minimising any adverse effects on investors and the relevant ISA managers. We're committed to achieving the most pragmatic outcome possible within the current regulatory framework, which mitigates the impact on investors but also maintains trust in the regulations and HMRC's compliance regime. So we'll need to wait until the summer to get a final answer on that, but ahead of that, don't do anything rash. There's no need to panic or get rid of your fractional shares or anything like that. For me, let's just see what happens. I don't think personally that the government will want to screw over millions of investors in an election year, so it's best just to carry on as is, or at least that's what I am doing. So some general remarks now on the ISA landscape. I think there is clearly lots of work still to do here. The lifetime ISA or LISA is screaming out for an increase in the property price cap. It just seems so simple and would help out lots of first-time buyers. If they just raised that up from 450k, I don't know why they didn't do that and instead chose to announce the Brit ISA. I reacted quite quickly to the Brit ISA on the day that it was announced. I've now had some time to think about it a little bit more. And, on reflection, I agree with the sentiment reflected in the comments that a Brit ISA will likely be a niche product with not much take-up from providers. I mean, if you look at the LISA as an example, That's not exactly widely available compared to, say, a stocks and shares ISA. And I think the Brit ISA would probably be even more niche and as a result expensive in comparison. The decision to delay any launch until after the election probably means that this thing will never see the light of day. Hunt promised to simplify the ISA landscape for investors. The introduction of a new one complicates things further, doesn't it? I hope that provides a bit of clarity on the changes for you ahead of the new tax year. I wanted to get something in writing from HMRC on this because, you know, to be blunt, as a northerner who's been promised all sorts of marvellous things by successive governments and not seen many of them materialise, I tend to not believe something is going to happen until it does. I'm glad that the main thing here, though, the multiple ISAs of the same type within the same financial year, is in the bag, and the way I'm going to use that in my own investing portfolio. So the 90% of my money that I invest every month into a global index fund, I'm going to keep that separate. And then on another platform, I'll be able to invest the 10% into the more speculative individual bets. This allows me to separate the set it and forget it style away from, my meddling hands and just keep them nice and clean. I'll see you soon.